This is sort of more like a interview, get to know you, just sort of figure out a bit more of your journey.
Yep.
Because I feel like I know a fair bit of it, but maybe I don't know everything. And especially now that we're doing a lot more with first home buyers, is trying to get into the mind frame of what it's like when you're actually purchasing your first property.
Yeah.
So how old were you at the time?
I think when we put a deposit, because we bought a block of land, so I think when we bought the block of land, I was about 25, turning 26, and then when we settled it and it was constructed, I was probably 26.
And so is that sort of like the same age group as all your friends at the time?
A couple of guys went earlier. There were a few tradie mates that, you know, they'd been out of school a few more years and probably saved a bit more. They were the ones that went first, and then I was sort of in behind them, and I was like itching to go. But always ran my own business, so it was a bit of a catch-22 in trying to get finance. So, yeah, that was definitely a goal for me to just get it ticked off.
Yeah, and so you obviously did that with your partner as well.
Yeah, there's no way I would have been able to do it without Kristen. Yeah, 100%, especially owning a business. It would have been extremely difficult not to have that solid income.
For a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah. So
Trying
she
to get
was
the banks approved.
Yeah, definitely. And back then as well, like we're talking 10 years ago. So the banks were a little bit more lenient, and the debt to income ratios were completely different. You're probably up around the 10 debt to income, which now it's like between 6 and 7. So yeah, lending capacities have come down quite a lot, which, you know, definitely hinders people.
And were you sort of the one that sort of put everything into motion? Or was it sort of Kristen that was also just as hungry to...
No, because I grew up around property, like not from a family sense, but grew up around developers, I was just like itching to get it. I'm surprised I didn't buy earlier, but I traveled a bit with work, and yeah, like uni and stuff like that. So it didn't happen for me. I think I should have bought earlier, but yeah, 26 was still pretty good, 25, 26. But yeah, I was definitely the one that was pushing for it. Kristen 100% wanted to buy it, but in terms of leading that ship, yeah, it's because of what I saw other people do and how they achieved their goals through property. It was just like, I have to get one.
Yeah, I suppose that's actually probably quite important, like to make sure that yourself and your partner's on the same page. Like, just how long ago was it? A few weeks ago, I heard a bit of a horror story where someone essentially voided their contract after they were unconditional on finance during a long settlement because the couple actually split up. And essentially what that means is they literally just gave away their deposit to the vendor just so they could exit out of the contract and they didn't have to settle and live with one another.
Yeah, geez.
So, I mean, that's a worst case scenario, but it's probably something definitely you want to be keeping in mind when you're looking at why do you actually want to get into the property market.
Yeah, and that's 100%. One thing that we always go through with clients is to make sure they're on the same page, because you'll often get one person driving the ship, and they'll go out and, you know, select a whole heap of properties to go and look at, and then they'll bring the partner along and they'll be like, this is crap, I don't want to look at this. Like, why are you looking at ones down here? I don't want a 2-bedroom, I want a 3-bedroom, like all that kind of stuff. So it's really important that people get on the same page, and yeah, Kristen and I, we've been on the same page, like 100%. We're pretty open with that, and it's because I'm always talking about it, like, oh, we should do this, we should do that. We're a little bit more relaxed these days in terms of what we're like actively doing. Well, actually, we're probably a little bit more active than we have been the last 4 years. But yeah, building it out, yeah, it took a lot. You know, your conversations all the time. What should we be doing this one? Should we be going and buying this? Yeah, like weighing up the options. But I kept it pretty simple. I didn't try to go too far out of the box on, you know, it was literally go to the mortgage broker, how much can I borrow? And then I would just look at my options.
I suppose because you live in the world, you can make it as complicated as possible, but it's not always the best thing to do.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, being complicated, especially in this world, can just lead you to stall. And, you know, in a rising market, that could be $10,000 a week. I've seen it track at $10,000 plus a week, even, you know, at lower price points. You know, one week you'll rock up and it's 450,000, the next week it'll be 460. It's just, yeah, it happens.
Can move very quickly when it's on.
Yeah. So if you can get it to 70%, like you're 70% comfortable on that's the move, the rest will figure itself out. Like as long as you're moving forward, 80%'s a little bit better, but you're never going to be 100%. You're never going to be 100%. This is the ideal property, because that's a unicorn property and they don't exist.
Yeah. Well, I suppose over the last 40 sort of months, or since the beginning of the pandemic anyway, it's been pretty clear that we've traveled through some very different property markets, right?
Yeah, it's been topsy-turvy for sure.
Yeah, well, I think we easily would have been hitting the $10,000 increase per week at the beginning of 2021, depending on the market, obviously.
Yeah.
But when you first purchased as well, do you remember what the market was like? Was it sort of like a FOMO market, or was it fear of overpaying?
No, it was definitely not fear of overpaying. It was FOMO. So people screaming to get into the market. It was pretty hot and heavy when I bought back then. And I even remember having this discussion with friends of mine saying, they were going to buy in a place called Endeavour Hills. And I was like, okay, that's cool. You want to buy out there. But they were saying, oh no, we're not going to get the 4-bedroom house, so we'll just keep saving. And I said to them, but the market's going up $10,000 a week, or even if it was $10,000 a month. I said, can you save that? Can you actually save more than $10,000 a month? And they were like, no, there's no way. We're sort of mid-20s at that stage. They wouldn't have been able to save that. So I said, look, you're probably better off just buying the 3-bedder to get into the market and then ride that wave, which they did. So they just jumped in and bought the 3-bedder rather than the 4-bedder.
They could still be saving if they were going for the 4-bedder.
Well, yeah, and that market back then was probably mid 4s, maybe 500,000, and now they're 900 for a probably a 3-bedroom out there.
So when you were sort of going into that first property, what was sort of the emotion like? Because you're about to take on essentially the most amount of debt you've ever taken, and were you extremely fearful of that, or were you worried about the numbers too much, or were you sort of confident that you knew in your ability and your partner's ability over the next few years to be able to handle that?
Yeah, it's always stressful. Hard to, it's an interesting question to rewind that far and say how stressed we were. I know we were super stressed during the period because the builder was a real pain in the ass, and probably why I switched into working in property full time. They stuffed us around a heap, as most people here with builders. But yeah, in terms of stress, I think we were just so excited to get into our own place. It was very much the same cost as rent. So in terms of the ability, yes, we weren't able to hand the keys back if we couldn't afford it anymore. But yeah, from that perspective, we were both young in our careers and business. I think we just had the confidence that everything would be okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you guys built. Did you use or take advantage of the grants at the time?
I reckon we would have had a grant. It wouldn't have been the big one. Back then, they were offering 30 grand. I'm not sure if we got that one. It might have been 10 or 12,000 back then. We might have just missed the bigger ones. But yeah, we took advantage of the grants. So it wasn't, we wouldn't have purchased a property just to get the grant. The grant just made sense for us.
Yeah, I feel like that's a mistake that some people can make. They're trying to chase the grant too much, and maybe it actually just doesn't work for their situation.
Yeah, and we were lucky. In terms of what we bought, there was 100% element of luck. But that luck comes from actually taking action. That's why we were lucky.
And what do you think the biggest mistake is that first home buyers can make whilst they're sort of on that journey? Well, obviously, we've just talked about, trying to force the grant into the situation. Obviously, they can be quite beneficial for people, especially the stamp duty concessions for a first home buyer.
Yeah.
What do you think, though, is a typical mistake that someone might make whilst they're at the very beginning of their journey?
It's probably seeking out advice, and I know that's really hard to get. Most people lean on their parents. They might ask their friends, how did you go about it? But yeah, just trying to get some good advice. And as I said before, it's really hard to find. But yeah, try to get someone that's, been in property or understands property, or reach out to a buyer's agent, even just to, if you can't afford them, they they might be able to give you some pointers. Like some people will give you some pointers, or you listen to a show like this, and we'll give you some tips along the way. But yeah, it's more like finding out where that information is coming from. If you are asking someone, like, what knowledge do they have on property purchasing? But I get it. It's super hard to find. My biggest thing would probably just start off with a broker. Like, they're the most accessible, but yeah, do your due diligence on those guys as well, because there'll be mortgage brokers and there's mortgage brokers. There's so many of them now. I got told the other day there was 17,000 of them. You almost need a broker for the brokers, because some will be good at
you do need a broker for the brokers, don't you?
You do. Like, honestly, I work with heaps of different brokers, and when a client comes and asks me, I've literally got one there on my list of people who I need to allocate to a broker, and I'm going through the list in my head going, yeah, this guy's good at that, this guy's good at this, maybe he's better suited over here. So yeah, there are brokers have specific, I guess, what they're good at. They're definitely suited to certain clients. But anyway, they are definitely one to start off with, because they will be able to just guide you through the initial steps, especially if you've got zero idea. I would start at a broker. You can always contact us as well. Like, if you've got zero idea on where to start, you can contact us.
And well, I suppose one of the things that I'd like to know, like, you've sort of developed through the real estate industry, you've obviously built a bit of a portfolio out as well. If you could sort of go back to being 25, is there anything that you do differently in order to try to surpass the level that you're at now?
It's a really good question. Hard to say. Like, hindsight's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is.
We would have bought the block next door, all that kind of stuff. But to be honest, because we ran like pretty hard in terms of our buying, I don't think we could have done any more. Like, honestly, I was on the back with the broker all the time saying, when can I buy? When can I buy? When can I buy? Because I was in the industry. Like, I'm sitting there, I was selling homes at that point, new homes, like for another builder and developments. And I was sitting there, had access to brokers. Like, I'd talk to him during the day about other people coming in and buying homes. So yeah, I had this close connection to them and say, like, hey, Andy, like, where am I at? How much can I borrow? And he'll be like, oh yeah, look, you could probably go again in maybe, 2 to 3 months. And I'm like, cool, what do I need to do? How much do I need to hit? And I'd always, hit those goals. And then it was like, bang, straight on. Again, going back to the first question, the assessment levels were much different back then. Like, it was easier for me to get funds. Like, honestly, it was much easier for me to get money. Income verification was different. They didn't have all the bots now that go through statements. It was much more manual. So the banks didn't have the same policy or compliance as they do now. So
not as rigorous. It was a little bit more cowboy.
Yeah, well, it's not
finance.
Even cowboy. Well, kind of cowboy, but it was, the property market was doing so well. They didn't really have anything to worry about. Like, everyone did well. Anyone that had a loan, the defaults rates would have been extremely low. So the, APRA and all those guys had nothing to worry about until, 2018, 17 with the big mortgage Royal Commission, like Mortgage Broking Royal Commission. That's when everyone
changed
got
it all.
Yeah, absolutely ripped. So that changed it all. And look, we're probably anyone that bought 10 years ago. For the generation that hasn't bought, or not even generation, but for the people that haven't bought yet, and you're still wanting to buy, we're like the new boomers to you guys, right? Like, because we were able to buy in different
pre-2017, pre-2018. Oh god, the times were good.
Yeah, it was good. Like, honestly, and touch wood, we were pretty gung ho and purchasing as much as we could, and like, it all sort of worked out.
Well, I suppose when you're in the sort of selling inside of things, and you would be keeping a pretty close eye on the market and how values are tracking, and you'd literally be seeing the same property that you sold or something similar this year selling, significantly more than what it did last year.
It wasn't even that. Like, it seriously wasn't that. It was more the guys that I worked with and for. and I just saw them accumulate. Like one guy came in, 29 years old, you know, he would have been, he was about 15 years older than me, and he'd been in the industry for 15 years. And I saw him, he was literally a washing machine sales guy. He came in and he was like absolutely killing it. Just cleaning
up.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, cool, that's number one. Even one of the guys that got me into it, like got me into this particular developer, he was smashing it out of the park, and he was, I think, you know, he was maybe 3 or 4 years older than me. So I was the youngest, and I was chasing these guys as much as possible. I used to, in the car park, I'd have my car and I'd go and park it next to the boss's car, and I'd just be like manifesting, like living through the boss. And, you know, like his car was always open. When he got a new one, I'd be like, hey, can I go and check out the car? It's like, yeah, go on. And I'd just sit in there and look at it. And we're talking like, you know, $650,000 cars. And yeah, it was just insane. So that was, you know, young. You're probably focused a little bit more on the materialistic side of things. That definitely changes over the course of time. But yeah, that's what got me out of bed and sort of the drive to just keep buying. Yeah, and just keep trying to get as much as we could.
I suppose like we're in a sort of a high interest rate environment now, and like I know a lot of people that are in the sort of boat of first home buyers that are saying things along the lines of, oh, like the interest rates are so high, repayments are too high, maybe they're a little bit nervous about what could be and where they could go, and they don't want to take that risk to sort of get in now. Though I suppose the question would be is, even if the interest rates come down, properties are going to go up, so you're sort of going to be at the same repayment level anyway. Like,
yeah,
what do you think?
Like in terms of where we were at when we purchased, it was like 450, like early 400s, but the interest rate was 6.5%. So you're still, you know, 1.75% below that. And the same type of house, like if you were to buy that exact same house, yeah, it's a lot more expensive now. You know, it's $850,000 to $900,000 for that exact same house. But that's not to say, like, we bought earlier, right? Like we bought earlier than what you would be buying if you're buying now. But we moved way further out than I wanted to. You know, like I moved, it was 15 minutes. It was, you know, 4 or 5 freeway exits that we had to move from where we wanted to be. You know, like we were renting in a place and we had to go, from that place, we had to move, I think it was 3 freeway exits. And that's like 50 Ks out of town. So the freeway exits are, you know, not every kilometer. It's like
there are
every
a few
10
minutes drive in between.
Yeah. It was 15 minutes. I remember going, this just added 15 minutes to my trip each way. So, you know, half an hour plus traffic. But yeah, so I guess that's another sort of sacrifice. Because again, I was so gung-ho on buying a property, I kind of didn't care where it was. I was just like, I have to get in and buy something. So yeah, wherever that money was, like if I could only afford it was $427,000. I remember exactly what it cost us. That was our max borrowing capacity, and we're probably at 90%, maybe even more. And it was literally wherever I could buy that property, that's where I'm buying. So if I was put into that same situation again, I wouldn't care where it was, as long as I chose the asset type right, or chose the property, you know, that suited us as best we could, I would go and buy. So wherever that put me now, because yeah, incomes would have gone up from back then. So lending capacities for first home buyers are probably sitting around that 550, 600 mark, maybe 650. So if you've got 650, you can get a really good place. So yeah, it's okay for people in that outer ring to move out. Like that sort of, I feel those guys are more susceptible to moving out, or they're going to be okay with, you know, moving out 15, 20 Ks
without having to change property types.
Yeah, from parents, right? Like, from the family home, you know, someone growing up in Mulgrave or, you know, Williamstown or somewhere like that, they're probably going to be okay to move out to, you know, even if they grew up in Point Cook, they're probably okay to go out to Werribee. or Lara even. So yeah, those guys are usually okay. It's the ones that are closer to the city that really struggle, you know, and they're the ones that their parents get upset. Oh, you can't afford housing and all this, and I'll probably annoy some people here, but that's the affordability crisis has been there for 30 years, 40 years. Like my parents,
longer. Like
yeah, my parents had an affordability crisis. They rented in Brighton and had to buy a house in Endeavour Hills. No one knew even where Endeavour Hills was. So yeah, like they had to do that 30, 40 years ago. And
well, I've heard the same story about my pop actually.
Yeah.
Like he was trying to buy in Port Melbourne, couldn't afford that, so bought in Beaumaris. And now Beaumaris is like, it's a dream suburb. It's right by the beach. It's gorgeous. And I remember them telling me at the time, that was like the sticks.
Yeah.
That was like, they were turning farmland into the suburbs out there then.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's always been around. I think it's not going to go away either. Like things aren't getting easier.
So it's like, though I feel those people will put their head in the sand more than people in that outer ring. So, you know, like 25, 30 Ks out. They're probably more likely to go and buy a property. The ones that are closer to the city, which is more dense, like in terms of the amount of people. But yeah, I think they're a little bit slower to go. They might be buying when they're closer to 30. Capacities will probably be up as well. They might be 8 to 900,000 in terms of what their purchasability would be. But yeah, they've just got to get their head around having to move location or changing asset types, as Tristan said before, like going into an apartment or going into a unit. And there's nothing wrong with those if you buy the right ones. You know, we're not talking about high-rise apartments or anything like that. We're talking about, a flat or a single-story unit complex. Like, totally okay with those types of products.
Something that's got a bit of land component to it as well.
Yeah, a bit of land component if you can. But again, it literally just comes down to your situation and what you can afford. But there's a property pretty much for everyone at their price point. Whether or not you rent vest, if you really want to live in the city or live close to town, then you just go and rent vest. Like, at least you're getting on the property ladder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also a part of your story as well. So you guys were, like, you obviously moved in and lived in your first home.
Yep.
And then you turned that into an investment property and went and rented further in.
Yeah. So we moved right in close to the city, just for work and things like that back then. And yeah, then we just kept buying. So every other property, and we rent vested for 5 years. And yeah, then we bought a family home. So there's literally everything that you can do can be done through rent vesting. Like, you don't have to live in the properties at all. If you want to buy a property and not live there, like, we've got a couple of rent vestors that we work with, and it's 100% a good plan for those that want to get on the property ladder but don't necessarily want to live in it, either from a location, property type, and price point. So if that price point's too low and it's not going to get into a property that you're wanting to live in, then it's a good option.